Hi all, welcome to Salesforce in 5 minutes. These are few interview questions along with answer and explanation that can be asked in an interview. But before that, if I was ever able to help you with any of the interview question in your real interview or help you understand any concept in Salesforce, please do subscribe to my channel. So this is the first interview question. We have a newly written the validation rule that the date field cannot be passed value, but when sales reps edits the old record which existed before the validation, those records are getting logged. How do we fix it? And this is a production issue. Okay, this is a production issue. So how do we fix it? You cannot just deactivate the validation. But first of all, let's understand what validation rule is. Basically, the validation rule is that our close date cannot be the past date, right? So this validation rule works. So let's say if I create a new opportunity named as test one, and I put the close date. Today's is 13th August, right? And if I put 5th August as my close date, which is a past date, and if I try to save it, it's going to throw me an error. Close date cannot be past date. Till this point, it's working perfectly fine. Okay, so but let's say I have written this the same validation rule on 13th of August, right? I've written this validation rule on 13th August, right? I have written it today. So there might be opportunities which existed before 13th of August. Like for an example, I have this opportunity whose close date is 1st date 2023, which is a past date, right? It is already past. Today is 13th, this is 1st August. So this date is already past. And if I try to edit any of the field, like let's say this is a production issue and the sales rep is inside this opportunity and he does not wants to update this close date, right? He does not wants to update this close date, but he wants to update amount, or let's say type. Let's say he wants to update this, right? And he try to click on save, he gets an error message. So because your close date is past date and you cannot update the close date, you cannot deactivate the validation rule because this is a production issue. You cannot change the data directly, right? So how do you fix it without making changes to this? How do you fix it, right? Because I'm trying to update any of this field, it will continuously throw me error, and this is how my opportunity will be blocked. User won't be able to edit this opportunity specifically, as I don't want to update the close date. If I update the close date like to future, that would work perfectly fine, but I don't want to update this close date as it's a data of production. I cannot directly make changes to it, right? So how do we fix it? Now to fix this issue, just go to your validation rule, edit this validation rule, and inside this validation rule we are going to use and. Along with and, we are going to use is changed. Right? Close date, and along with it, the validation that we have, or the formula that we have. Now this functionality will only work when I will change the close date. It won't work every time, but it will only work when I change the close date because it's inside the and, right? If I'm changing the close date and if my close date is like previous date or past date, only then fire the error message. So I'm going to click on check syntax. No errors are found, and if I click on save, now, if any person goes to opportunity, even if he wants to try to update anything else and he clicks on save, it will work. Except only when if he tries to update the close date, which he can always put in future, right? In that cases, only the validation rule will fire. So for example, if I put 9, it will fire. But it won't fire if I am trying to update any other fields. So that's how we can fix this issue. Let's go to the next interview question. Next is what is the difference between queue and public group in Salesforce? So I've already listed it down, right? Public groups are nothing but used for sharing. So public groups are, let's say we want to share a record with specific group of people, right? We all add them all to the public group and we just share the record using the sharing rules, right? So that's why public groups are more often used for sharing the record, right? On the other hand, queues are used to assign the cases or assign any other object, right? So you create a case assignment rule, and what you do is if there is any specific type of a case, you assign it to a queue. So queue are more often assignment kind of stuff, not for sharing the record. Next is a public group. Public group don't work with specific object. Like public groups are not object specific. So if you go and create a public group, it won't ask you to specify which object do you want to create the public group for. On the other hand, queues work with public group. So if queues work with specific objects, sorry. So if you are going to create any kind of a queue, it will ask you to go and like select which object do you want things to work for. Next is queue cannot be the part of public group. So if you're going to create a public group, it will ask you that, like for an example, if you want to select who are going to the part of public group, it's going to ask you public group, roles and subordinate, but it won't ask ever that do you want queue to be the part of public group. So queue cannot be a part of public group. On the other hand, public group can be part of queue. So if you are going to create a queue and you have to select a queue member, public group can be the part of queue. So this is another question, the answer to the another question. And the third question is, what exactly is implicit sharing in Salesforce? So implicit sharing is the nothing but standard sharing of Salesforce. Like for an example, this sharing cannot be updated or cannot be modified by a specific user. Just for an example, if you go to account and contact in your sharing rules, right? So account is parent. Like for an example, account is private, public, protected, anything we want to, and contact is controlled by parent, right? And you cannot make changes to this sharing, right? You cannot make changes to the sharing rule of contact. You cannot make it because it is by default shared. That's what we call as implicit sharing, which is built-in sharing provided by Salesforce itself. That's what we call as implicit sharing. So implicit sharing is built-in sharing, number one. Number two is account and contact is a good example of it. Cannot be modified by user. For example, OWD of contact, right? So this is what implicit sharing is in Salesforce. Next, this is a really good question, and it's kind of tricky. So let's say we have account named as ACC1, right? There is an account ACC1 which has three contacts under him. So inside the account ACC1, there are three contacts: contact 1, con1, con2, and con3. So con1, con2, con3 has the same parent, same account, that is ACC1. Now let's say if I update con1's phone number, if I'm going to update the con1's phone number, con2 and con3's phone number must also be updated. So in that case, which context will you write the trigger for, right? So usually what we think of is, if we are going to, like for an example, if I'm going to update the contact's phone number, I want another contact's phone number should also be updated. In that cases, we usually think in before trigger terms. But before trigger works only when you are working on same object and same record, right? In that cases only we go with before triggers. Here you have same object but different record, right? Same object means contact, different record means when I'm updating the con1, I have to update con2 and con3. So in that cases we have to go with after triggers or after contacts. So the answer to this question is we have to use after contacts in Salesforce to fix this problem. Now let's move on to the last question. How can we pass the data from one LWC component to another LWC component which are not related to each other, and also give a real-time example of the same? Now, to pass the data from one component to the another component, there are two ways, but I'm going to only discuss one way which, because I use it very extensively, that is LMS, Lightning Messaging System. So LMS is used, so I'm going to also write it down. LMS is used to pass data between unrelated component. So if I have to pass the data between two components which are not completely related to each other, that's where we go with Lightning Messaging System. And a real-time example of Lightning Messaging System would be, let's say if I have to build a community, okay, a very customized community if I have to build it, and I have to build a complete shopping page and a cart page. So I have to build a separate component for shopping page and separate component for cart page. So whenever I'm going to I'm going to click on any product that I have to add to the cart, if I click on it, I have to pass the data from the shopping page to the cart page, which are two different components. So this is where I will use Lightning Messaging System to pass the data from shopping page, which is a completely different component, and the cart page, which is a completely different component. So example would be shopping and cart page. So these are the few questions that I was able to come up with. If you found this video helpful and I was able to help you out, please do subscribe to my channel.